Well, Martin, good morning. I'd like to welcome you, Sir
Morning.
Martin Sorrell, to this recorded talk for the Asia Scotland Institute. And it's extremely good of you to come on again to share your thoughts on what's going on in a very, very rapidly changing world. We were just talking about how since we last spoke, we've seen the Chinese move against Hong Kong. We've seen the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And we've had the Cummings event in the UK. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think last time we spoke, you quoted Rumsfeld, known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And we seem to be in that last territory. But one thing is for sure is that S4 Capital, which you have built, is a remarkably successful company.
Early days, Roddy.
Early days, but as you said, I'm an optimist like you. So anyway, and we'd love you to share your thoughts on building that business, and your thoughts perhaps on your advice to those dealing with these difficult times as they strive to build and lead businesses themselves. If we could kick off with that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, as far as S4 is concerned, what we did a couple of years ago, or what I did a couple of years ago after I left WPP, is just try and identify where we thought the growth was. I mean, if Saatchi's, I've had sort of 3 lives in the advertising and marketing services business. The first one was Saatchi's, where what we were really focused on was globalization. It stems back to Theodore Levitt's article in the Harvard Business Review in 1983 about globalization and how, in his view, although he did admit he over-egged it, in order to make the point, in his view, everybody would all consumers would consume things in the same way everywhere. And so Saatchi was about globalization. WPP was about globalization and the rise of technology. So two buckets, the 2 buckets that I think really contain everything that you want to think about geography and technology. And we globalized WPP through JWT and Ogilvy and Y&R and Gray and others. But we also started in the late 90s and into the new millennium to build a technological base to the business. And of course, S4 is really purely about growth. I mean, when in the last knockings, if I can put it, of WPP in my last couple of years, or last year, the growth flattened, which was a major concern and aggravation. And that was because the business was weighed down by the traditional assets, just like every analog business is. And so S4, really, there were 3 basic sort of tenets. One, we were going to go for the growth. We had to have decent margins, and we weren't in a position where we were going to be technologically disruptive. So when I looked at the WPP portfolio, which was considered a $20 billion portfolio, which was flat, so there were things that were up, things that were down, and things that were flat, there were 3 areas that struck me that for growth. The first was first-party data. That's data owned by clients and the signals that the platforms like Amazon and Google and Facebook and Tencent and Alibaba and now TikTok have. So melding that first-party data to create digital advertising content, which was also growing like Topsy with the growth of digital advertising, and pump that out programmatically in what we call personalization at scale. So 4 basic principles: digital, where the growth is, where we're seeing, even during COVID-19, it's the least effective of the addressable market. The addressable market in media is about 550 to 600 billion pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's probably about 500 to 550 billion, of which 245 billion pre-COVID, or about 47.5%, is in digital. And we're now starting to forecast that digital will be an even greater proportion of the market in 2022 or 2024. We think it'll be 57.5% by 2022. One of the leading analysts in America, Michael Nathanson, predicts it will be, I think, 67% by 2024. So first principle, digital is where the growth is. Second principle is this, what we call Holy Trinity model of first-party data driving the creation of digital advertising content and being pumped up programmatically. The third principle is going to market as faster, better, cheaper. Sounds glib. Speed, quality, value is probably a better more elegant way of describing it, but it's about agility, which is the key corporate attribute that you need nowadays, whether you're analog or digital. And the digital companies have it, but the analog companies have to develop it. Better means understanding that digital ecosystem, which is dominated by the 6 companies that I've already mentioned, but you would add Apple and Microsoft, and you'd add Adobe and Salesforce and Oracle, and IBM and SAP, and Baidu and ByteDance, the parent of TikTok, and you'd add Twitter and Pinterest and Snap and Samsung and Netflix and Spotify. So those are the companies that we profess to understand, or we're keen to get to understand more and more, so we can advise our clients on how they distribute their budgets between hardware, software, and the platforms. And cheaper means efficiency, not quite as rigorous or rigid as ZBB or zero-based budgeting, because that's come under a little bit of attack for being too draconian and not interested enough in innovation and branding. But that mantra of faster, better, cheaper, although it does sound weird and a bit superficial, really is the core of what's happening at the moment, and COVID just accelerates it. And the final principle is the unitary structure. At Saatchi's and WPP, we sort of believe that it's rather like detergent brands or like Unilever or Procter, that you'd have all these brands, and although you knew they cannibalize one another, but you built market share. That now is out of the window. It's past its sell-by date. It's archaic. And what you have to do is concentrate on bringing the firm together as one to execute. So those 4 principles: digital is where the growth is, the Holy Trinity model, faster, better, cheaper, and the unitary structure. So that's the background to WPP, and we've had very significant growth. Last year, in our first full year, we were up 40-45%. This year, we were budgeting 30%. This is organic growth, excluding deals, and we committed to doubling the size of the company organically over 3 years. And we believe we still, even though our budgets, as I said, were for 30% organic growth, and we delivered about 14% to 19%, depending on which metric, whether you look at revenue or like-for-like gross profit growth, delivered about 19% gross profit growth in the first quarter. And I've seen the April numbers, and they look okay too. And so we're starting to build momentum even during COVID, and we still think we have a fighting chance of doubling the size of the company organically in 3 years. Mathematically, that means we have to grow by about 24% compound. So 19 in the first quarter is not bad in the context of that, despite the ravages of COVID. So that's where we are. Just turning to how. Look, I'm not holding myself out in any way as being a model or emblematic or icon of how you should do it. I can just tell you how we do it. And basically, it's like last night I sat down and sent out my weekly note to everybody. It's all 2,550 of us now, because we recently added, since we last talked, a data and analytics company in Latin America called Digidat. And that goes in with Mighty Hive inside our programmatic and data analytics company. I think the only thing that you can do is this: you have to lay out the realities of the situation, which, in comparison to when we last talked, probably the atmosphere has got a bit better. I mean, we've got all the trouble around Hong Kong and China, and the decoupling of the US and China, and around the terrible events around George Floyd. And the unrest in America, but generally, I would say, as far as coronavirus is concerned, there has been significant loosening. And I've been saying in my weekly missives that I thought the lockdowns would be eased significantly in May and June, and that seems to be coming to pass. We have to watch out for reinfections, clearly. And second waves, but basically things are loosening up. And one of the signals of Digidat last week is to the market and to clients and to our people, and indeed to competitors, I guess, is that we're ready for further action. And I want to be in a position to take the company forward even faster as we come out of the lockdown, but certainly by the end of June. I think things subject to any relapse will come out of it quite strong. So I think you have to paint the realities, and then but you have to give people hope and a vision for the future. You can't be doom and gloom. You have to be optimistic. And the analogies for this, people quote Shackleton, the explorer, Napoleon. Maybe that's not such a good parallel, but I think you basically have to be authentic about it. No BS. I think you have to lay it out as you see it is, and then you have to paint the vision. And I think the thing that made the biggest impression on me during the last couple of months was Harvard Business School had a case study for alumni, and that about 2,000 of us on a call like this, and it was about the Chilean mining crisis, and when those 33 miners were trapped underground under 700 meters of impenetrable rock. Everybody said it was impossible to get them out alive. You went back to the Russia's submarine disaster when it was on the bed of the ocean and they couldn't get them out, and they likened it to that. And there are some real parallels there to that crisis and Corona, a seemingly impossible situation, and yet they managed to get all 33 out, I think, after 77 days, and managed to get a borehole through the rock after 17 to 19 days. And the really interesting thing about that case study is, or that actual event, was that the impetus for that drilling that hole through this impenetrable rock in 17 to 19 days, the idea as to how to do it, because it was regarded as being impossible, the idea about how to do it came from a 23-year-old engineer, who the guy running the mission to save the miners, which the president had laid out crystal clear. He said, we will get these miners out. Actually, he said dead or alive, which grated a bit with me, because I thought he should have said just we'll get them out without going into the more gory detail. But he set the mission. He hired a guy, brought a guy in from Codelco, the state mining company, because this was a private mining company. And this guy listened to what everybody said. That was one of his big qualities. And then acted on this 23-year-old engineer. So say it as it is, set a vision, and then go for it.
That would sound to me like extremely good advice for politicians around the world, which unfortunately they're not all following. But
yeah, I think look, we sort of discussed this. It is you're right. I mean, you corrected me last time. It's not a black swan, really. That's an unknown. This was a known unknown. But when you get these things, and at Davos nobody really talked about it, and that was the end of January. When these things happen, and you're surprised by them, whether they're a black swan or not, the instinctive reaction is to overcompensate. Quite rightly, because one death, let alone 380,000 or whatever the true number is at the moment, one death is more than enough. And so politicians and the heads of business and everybody probably overcompensates. We overdo the reaction because we were surprised by it. And our own Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, almost died, apparently, from the virus. So he is naturally, psychologically, going to be overcautious. I wonder, being somewhat cynical about these things, as to whether the reason that he's become a little bit less cautious, and there have been some significant easing recently, is in a way, this is a very cynical view, somewhat related to the Cummings affair. That what happened because of Cummings, what he's done is to overcompensate for it.
Yeah. I'd like Martin to bring in Elizabeth Linder, who's on the call. Elizabeth has a background with Google and Facebook, and now is with Beautiful Destinations. which is an eco-travel company, which she'll explain to you. And she is a member of the Asia-Scotland Institute Board and is an American living in London. Elizabeth.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you, Roddy. We met briefly on our in the past. I'm the executive director of Beautiful Destinations. So
right.
we specialize in nation branding and soft power at the national level. Something that I would love to hear your thoughts on is, as Roddy mentioned, I spent 8 years as a public spokesperson for Facebook, building the politics and government division. And Mark Zuckerberg recently brought to his town hall to employees online to share with the general public his thinking and the company's thinking about the future of remote working and the challenges and opportunities that provides. But something he specifically said, which I found interesting, is in the post-COVID world, we have an opportunity to hire not only people who would be physically within the proximity of one of our offices, but we really can look around the entire world and say, what kind of talent do we want to bring in, whether or not that talent is based at one of the company hubs, because of course people now we can draw in to work from anywhere. So I was just wondering, you know, as in thinking about executive leadership teams or management, are there any pockets of individuals, either in terms of their geography or in terms of their background, that you think this new future of remote working helps to, helps to uncover and bring into your businesses to bring fresh thinking on board?
Well, if theoretically, if intelligence or ability is evenly distributed, obviously it's influenced by resource and income, but on the assumption, which I think is correct, that the more you open things up and the more access that you give to people, the more ability you can tap into, the more knowledge and ingenuity you can tap into. That's why I think, basically over time, the Chinese win, because there are 1.4 billion of them, and there are only 300 million plus Americans and 60 million of us. So inevitably, they'll come back. I mean, they'll come back from where they were 200 years ago. They've been on the wrong side of history for 100 or so years. They'll come back on the right, I'd say. So on the basis of that thinking, if that's correct, it must be so. So if you disperse your workforce, or you disperse access to your company more broadly away from, in America, in our case, we're centered in New York, LA, San Francisco, Mountain View. Those are our centers. We have others in the US, but that's Seattle now we're building, but that's essentially. So if we disperse it to Denver, to Austin, to Boston, to Miami more, where we're in Miami as well, but more, then but by obviously we must get better, I think. What we're doing is already moving to a hybrid model. So even within 4 or 5 weeks of COVID, we started to jettison leases. I mean, we're a bit different because we only started just under 2 years ago. We've added now 10 units, 6 to our content pillar, and 4 to our data and analytics and programmatic pillar, so to Medium Monks and Mighty Hive. So we've done 12 transactions in the last couple of years. And so as our fourth principle is unitary structure, we want to bring everybody together as rapidly as possible. And we're managing to do that faster than we thought we were, because we're developing now a hybrid model. So it's a tension there, because on the one hand, we're saying to people, if you want to work more from home, if you want flexible commuting, or if you want to live outside San Francisco or Mountain View or LA or New York. And I was talking to one of our people last week, and he said he's up in the Upper West Side in New York, about 32 years old. And he said it's deserted. Half of his friends have gone from the city, they've gone to upstate New York, moving. I mean, not just temporarily, but moving. Austin, Denver, Boulder, whatever. If that happens, that's good. So we'll lose some of our leases faster than we were going to do before, because there's always a tension when you want to bring people together. You know, people, particularly if you're aggregating brands, and we're moving to one brand, but we have two, one around content and one around programmatic. So we brought 6 companies together around Media Monks and content, and 4 companies in data and programmatic around Mighty Hive, and then ultimately we're bringing Media Monks and Mighty Hive together, you know, as S4. There's always tensions around that, but this COVID has meant this goes fast. That's on the one side. On the other side, and this is where the tension is, we all feel, and this may be the old fart speaking, but we all feel that we lose, and Mark Zuckerberg mentioned this as well in his town hall. They recruit a lot of graduates and undergraduates, and when those people come into the firm, they want to try and school them on the culture of the firm and how they go about things. And if you don't have a physical presence and you can look them eye to eye, eye in the eye, and have, you know, that creative tension, you lose something. So I wrote this weekend, you know, that we are going to the hybrid model. One of our units on Friday said they're going to stay working from home. This is in San Francisco and Mountain View until September the 30th. And this is driven by Google and Facebook's decision to work from home to the end of the year, Twitter's decision to get rid of offices, if that's really what they're saying. So obviously, offices are becoming less important, but there is this tension, and I think you have to watch out. So the answer to your question is, yes, we're going to get access to more talent, which from our point of view is a boon, because the more access we have, the better it is. So a dispersed model is better. So I think Zuckerberg is dead right. But on the other hand, that dispersed system creates some tensions that we may be wrong about. I said it was the old part, so maybe we're wrong. Maybe you don't have to be together. Maybe the technology is going to be so good, what I call beam me down Scotty. If we get to a stage where the technology is, you know, here am I sitting in a garden talking to you, presumably at home, in a fairly relaxed way on a Monday morning, it may be that the technology will get to such, you know, maybe we should ask Elon Musk to focus on this as well, that we will get beam me down Scotty, that we will be able, you know, it's a funny thing, but I remember John Chambers many years ago, this must be 12 years ago, maybe, he used to have a conference every 2 years in Kiowa Island for CEOs and CIOs. And he had, it was the beginnings of Cisco WebEx, and I'm not exaggerating. He showed us, and we used at one of the first meetings, Cisco WebEx, and it was almost as though the guy was beamed in, the person we were talking to was beamed into the room. It was almost like a hologram of being beamed in. Now that technology does not seem to have been developed for whatever reason, but I do believe we will have a technology where they will beam you, you know, into my garden in some way, shape, or form, and the mode of communication will be so strong that it will clearly not replace, you know, physical or contact, but or socially distant contact, but it will be almost as good. So I think things are going to change quite dramatically, and that's been driven. You know, I think COVID-19 is a sort of petri dish for all these developments. It's a burning platform. It's a digital accelerator for everything that we're doing.
Martin, of course, in the French elections, someone was using a hologram, because I can't remember the candidate was. He appeared in several places at the same time. Do you recall that?
Yeah,
that was in France. I know. You talked about Chile and the mining crisis and how the 23-year-old or was came up with the bright idea. Moving to the next generation, if I may, Tom Bracey, who's on the call, is one of our student followers. And Tom, I'm sure you've got a question for Sir Martin, because you're going to be very much part of the new workforce living in the post-COVID world.
Hi, Martin, how are you? Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity today. I was wondering, what advice would you give to undergraduates who are looking to get into the job search in the next few years, and how to maximize your potential to kind of in a maybe a socially distanced working space.
What are you studying and where?
Yeah, so I'm studying business and geography at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm just about to go into my 4th year. So obviously, the job world is very much looming.
Well, it's obviously very difficult, and you know, with unemployment in America at 25%. I mean, the furlough here masks the unemployment here, and of course, now with the government's decision to cease the furlough in October or whenever, unemployment or growth in unemployment is going to be a really big issue. And you know, it's very difficult. And the only advice I can give you is to use this time as you go into your 4th year. This, you know, your last year, I guess, unless you go on to further education, to use it meticulously to plan what you want to do. I mean, my dad used to say to me, find an industry that you enjoy, and then find a company within that industry you enjoy, and you know, work there. And after you spent time there, if you fancy building your own company, you know, build a reputation, not an external reputation maybe, but internally or with institutions if it's a listed company, build a reputation and then go out and start something on your own. That's what he always said. So I would, it's going to be very difficult, Tom. It's funny, and at WPP I started a thing called the fellowship scheme, which was a 3-year graduate program. So for first degree graduates and second degree. So we took people in at the age of around 21, 22, and then at 27 after business school or law school or whatever. And we used to take in about 10 a year. And it was a program described by the Wall Street Journal as harder to get into in the Harvard Business School, which it was. We used to get, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 applications for these 10 places. It was extraordinarily difficult. And what we did was, over 3 years, we placed people in different disciplines. So you could do media with Mindshare in London. You could, this first year. The second year, you could do social with Ogilvy in New York. And the third year, you could go to Shanghai to do branding with Landor or whatever it happened to be. And after 3 years, you were placed in the companies. Very successful scheme, plan. Unfortunately, the new powers that be at WPP have abandoned that, which I think is a terrible mistake. And I'm thinking actually just currently of doing exactly the same, or not exactly the same, doing a scheme like that at S4, because I think at a time, you know, your question sort of embodies it. At a time when everybody's going left, we should go right. So at a time when it's very difficult, I think you see, the average age of the people inside S4 is very young. The Mighty Hive people, there are 550 Mighty Hivers. The average age is about 25. The average age of the monks, there are about 2,000 of them, is about 32. So we're on one of the reasons I think why it is we've had so few corona cases. We have virtually none, thank God, of infections and no serious consequences. Sadly, one or two of our people have lost family members, and we wish them long life for them and their families. But essentially, it's been pretty much a miracle for us. And I think the reason is that we tend to have younger, actually more women, and women have been less affected. You know, the most vulnerable categories is me. I'm in the vulnerable category, over 70 and male. So I think this is the time when we should bring in some bright young talent. And coming back to the previous question, you know, that a way of doing that obviously would be to access people on a more diverse level. I'm not talking about any great scale because we're small, but might take 2 or 3 a year. I'd certainly take one at S4, and we probably have one at Media Monks, maybe one at Mighty Hive, at least for the first year, to see how it goes. Maybe not quite the same program. I think 1-year assignments are too short. Maybe we make it 2 years and 2 years and make it a 4-year. We could do one in content, one in data and analytics and programmatic, because we have 2 basic areas, and maybe even go even longer. But I think we'll do something similar, but obviously focused on digital. So my advice to you would be, use this year you have at Edinburgh, take a significant amount of your time each day of each week to plan, say, what are the industries, what are the verticals that attract you, and what are the companies within those verticals that attract you. Look at what they are looking for, and then apply on that basis and tailor your application to what you think they're looking for. And try and pick out the 3 things, for example, that you think they're most interested in. So I hope that's useful advice.
That's great. Thank you very much. It's great advice.
Elizabeth, did you have anything else you'd like to come back on before I switch across to Doug?
I think one other question, Sir Martin, that I was thinking about, you were describing the way that you've structured the business, the WPPP companies, in terms of the programmatic research side, and then in terms of the content side. For growing businesses, how often do you advise taking a step back to think about a reorg or a restructure of the way that you think about your divisions? What has historically been your pattern for company or corporate reorgs?
Well, we've done a few already. I mean, we've only basically been in existence since, well, as a combined entity since this Christmas Eve of 2018, and as one entity, you go back to June of 18 when we did our first deal with MediaMonks. But I would say, you could say we really started at the beginning of 2019. And the answer to your question is, we've gone through 1 or 2 already. I mean, we started off with the 2 pillars. We've now combined, like Digadat joined us last Monday, and on Tuesday, email addresses were changed. They've been fully integrated. The name was changed. I mean, we've done it immediately. Now, we had a bit of feeding in time when we were doing the due diligence and we were keen to get going. But, the answer is we've reorganized. The most significant reorganization we've done during 19 and into the beginning of 20, apart from the integration of Circus and Firewood and IMA and BizTech and Caramel Pictures and everything else, despite from that, the other thing that we've done is to effectively create 3 verticals. We have enterprise enterprise content. We have enterprise digital media planning and buying, programmatic and data analytics. And we have SMB and small agency programmatic and digital media planning and buying. And above it, we have a strategic layer which combines everything. So we go to clients, we're in a number of pitches at the moment, which we detest because they're too commoditized and dominated by procurement. But we much prefer the land and expand technology. With Facebook, and Google, we built Google our biggest relationship. We built those, and Facebook is growing very rapidly by winning a project and then winning another project, not by going into big commoditized pitches. But what we've done, so we're now going to market, there's a strategic layer on top of those 3 verticals, and underpinning everything is data analytics. And that's a restructure that effectively has been put into place within the first 12 months. So I think the answer to the question is, we're continuing, we meet every day. The top 8 people in our company, we have a call at 2 o'clock. I mean, this was stimulated by the coronavirus. We call it the CCG, the Coronavirus Crisis Group. But we've been running it now this is 10 weeks. And this again came out of the Chilean experience. That was one of the ways to try and deal with it, to have a group of the senior people, and means we can turn on a 6-bit. And if we detect like on a hybrid office model, we've already jettisoned, I think it's 3 leases in New York and London, and our people are already working with fluidity, and will come together as things start to become clearer. Will come together in various different ways. So I would say we're continuously changing, and we made a decision a few days ago that we're not going to go into media buying. We're not interested in any traditional. We're in digital media buying, but we're not interested in any traditional activity at all because we think it's become too commoditized. So everything we do is purely around digital, and the addressable market, as I said, is about 550 to 600 billion pre-COVID, about 500 to 550 billion post, and the total addressable market that we're in, if you include marketing services and trade budgets, is about 1.8 trillion. It's huge. There's about 500 billion in media, there's about 500 billion in marketing services, and there's about another 700 billion, so 1.7, 1.8 trillion in trade budgets.
Martin, thanks very much. I'm conscious of the time. I'm just wondering, Doug, if you have a final question before we start to wrap up.
Well, perhaps if I may, Sir Martin, you've emphasised about S4 and its focus on growth and how you've obviously achieved that through acquisitions. But just now, you've just highlighted the need.
Not through acquisitions. I mean, the primary driver of the growth is the organic growth rate.
Right.
It's that 24% compound that we need on top line and bottom line. We want to maintain margins at over 20%. It's that 24% growth rate that we want to achieve consistently, which is not easy, but going through COVID, but we think we have a fighting chance even with the ravages of COVID, as I said before. So it's organic growth is the prime driver. We've set up our 2 pillars around content and programmatic and data analytics, and now we want to drive the 2 together. And we want whoppers. Whoppers our revenues are about $400 million, and Google and Apple. We're not allowed to talk about Apple publicly because we have an NDA, but they are both over 5% of our revenues, over $20 million a year. We need more like that, and we're on the cusp. Facebook, Uber, ServiceNow, SoFi, Netflix, Spotify, we're all the HP, Procter, Mondelez, Coca-Cola, Nestle, Bayer, Merck, Sanofi, Novartis, WBA, Walgreen Boots, and others, Ace Hardware and Best Buy are all examples of companies where we're building relationships and we want to get over 5% of our revenue base. So organic growth is the primary driver, which you should get because we're in the growth areas, buttressed by merger growth.
Absolutely. I was thinking more about the fact that you are a large organization, you are geographically diverse as well.
Yeah.
And it was that point that you mentioned about the need to have a unified manner. You're unlike the sort of more traditional Unilever model, where you're speaking in a more, you have unity. And I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you achieve that organizationally, culturally.
We look at, so the 8 people who meet every day come from one is actually in Scottsdale, Arizona at the moment. Another one is in Denver. Another one's in Amsterdam. Another one's in Singapore. I mean, we're spread around the world. Geographically, we're 70% Americas, that's North and South America, 20% Western Europe, and 10% Asia Pacific. And I want to be 40, 20, 40, because I think the 2 bookends, if I can put it that way, of the Americas and Asia Pacific are going to become the dominant forces. I think Western Europe will be increasingly marginalized. That's not because we have to be bigger in Western Europe, but I don't want to increase the proportion of Western Europe. I mean, the UK has got a big challenge, not just from coronavirus, but from Brexit, which people have tended to forget about. It'll come more to the fore now. And, I think we have to be Singapore on steroids, but I still think that Western Europe is going to be very challenged, and our growth and development. We just took another business, merging another business in Latin America, as I said, The reason is they have tremendous creative and technological talent. The same thing applies to Asia Pacific. We just started in India. We have a very good business, small business in China. I want to get scale. I'm worried about decoupling, which I think is inevitable between the US and China, whether it's a Trump administration again or whether it's Biden. I think both Republicans and Democrats are going in the same direction. Maybe the Democrats not as forcefully, but I think China, if you look at the decks that are circulating amongst Republicans and Democratic PACs and the election resources, they all believe that China is, that an anti-China stance is an election winning or election enhancing strategy. And that's why the invective, that's why Trump made the speech that he made on Friday. When you listen to it, it was real fire and brimstone, but he didn't up the tariffs. So he doesn't want to destroy the market for the obvious reason. So, and the markets this morning are strong. So the market is shrugging that off quite rightly because there isn't anything tangible that's coming out of this at the moment. You have to see. Maybe after the election, if Trump was to win again, which I still feel he may do. I think these riots in America, which obviously the Floyd murder was terrible, but these riots probably help net help Trump. I don't think they disadvantage him. It's neutral to positive for Trump, I think. Maybe Biden, with his links to the black communities, will gain a bit of traction. He certainly, I think, will push that, but and the black communities will push that. But whether that's sufficient in the election, I think at times like this, obviously there's a fair old way to go yet. We're just into June, but November is coming up, and we'll have to see what happens. But I still sort of feel that Trump can swing it, despite all the negatives. So I'm very worried about the Chinese-American decoupling. I think that's actually the most serious issue that we face. Climate change obviously is the key, and it was the key at Davos, but everybody forgot about the virus and forgot about China. Not forgot about, because bubbling under the surface at Davos was China-US. That was the key issue actually at the end of the day.
Martin, I think we ought to now thank you, let you get on with your day. It's enormously kind of you to spend time with us. We've heard every conceivable generation on this call. Tom, I'm sure, is very grateful for your advice. I know that Elizabeth, building the business that she's with globally, with her own background, has found your comments most interesting, and so has Doug. And thank you very much for coming out again at the 2 o'clock at Epsom, as it were.
All right. Good luck. Good luck.
Very appreciated.
Keep in touch. Thanks very much.
Good luck.